So, Chainsaw Man's ending. What? Yeah, well, for those of you who haven't been keeping up with Chainsaw Man, apparently it's coming to its end here pretty quick. See, because, well, it's no surprise to anybody that the War Devil arc was going to be the last arc of Part 2 of Chainsaw Man. With how Part 2 of Chainsaw Man was wrapping up, it felt as though there was probably gonna be a Part 3. You know, on account of the fact that the world is kind of scuffed right now. However, with Chapter 231 killing off one of the main characters of the story, and therefore bringing about insurmountable change to the Chainsaw Man universe, makes it seem as though, well, Chainsaw Man's gonna end here in like probably the next 10 or so chapters. And that is not what I, or really anybody, anticipated. Yes, years ago I anticipated that Part 2 would be the last part of Chainsaw Man, but I figured that Part 2 was gonna be the last part of Chainsaw Man because the Death Devil is the logical final antagonist to this story. And now with the Death Devil gone and Yoru and Denji coexisting, while that equation does sound like it would build up to a happy, logical ending to Chainsaw Man, Chapter 231 just took Chainsaw Man in about the oddest direction I could have possibly thought of. Because who in their right mind would have thought to kill off Pochita? Well, I guess those aren't the kind of questions you ask when you're reading a Tatsuki Fujimoto manga, but still, even for Tatsuki Fujimoto, Chapter 231 is an odd one. And to truly understand what's happening in Chapter 231 and figure out how it could lead us into the end of Chainsaw Man, we're gonna have to talk about the ending of Chainsaw Man as a whole. And thus today we're doing a comprehensive rundown on everything you, the reader, needs to understand heading into what could be the last couple of chapters of Chainsaw Man. Because let's be real, Part 2's not only been running for a while, but also a lot has happened. And most of it's been nonsensical. Not in a bad way, but in like a Fujimoto way. And thus today, in order to make sense from the chaos, we're gonna run down the key events of the War Devil arc and the events of Chapter 231 to give us the best possible picture of how Chainsaw Man is coming to its conclusion. And thus, with no further ado, I bring to you Chainsaw Man's ending explained. Before we get to breaking down what I presume to be the ending of one of my favorite mangas of all time, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you're looking for an additional Nick video every single week, you can go ahead and find my Naruto reaction series using the fourth wall link in my description below. We are on to Shikamaru versus Tamari. But before we get into all that, I want to talk to you about the sponsor of today's episode, Free Cash. Free Cash is an online platform where users from all across the world can sign up for free and make money online playing mobile games. And if that sounds too good to be true to you, well, Free Cash has 4.8 out of 5 stars on Trustpilot after 250,000 plus reviews. And listen, I know a lot of you out there are probably playing video games for free, or maybe even paying to play video games, but that ends today. I personally have been obsessed with dice streams recently. I've been rolling dice, raiding my friends' kingdoms, and building my dice empire. People are starting to wonder how I roll so good, and honestly, I think I was just born with it. But whether it's dice streams or Disney Solitaire, I've been stacking up cash just playing mobile games while I'm watching TV, in the rare occasion that my girlfriend's the one driving us somewhere. Whenever I got a free minute, why not make some money playing some games? And in order to maximize just how much I was earning while gaming, I made a couple of in-app purchases to speed up my progress. And wildly enough, for making those in-app purchases, I got cash back. And when I finally built up enough money in my free cash account, I cashed out, and it was easy. I paid out directly to my PayPal account, and I could use it however I wanted, which was unfortunately on my car. So what are you waiting for? Try out Free Cash for yourself today. If you click the link in my description or scan the QR code on screen right now, you get a $5 bonus on the first offer that you start. And while, depending on what country you're in, your interface may look a little bit different, don't worry, the functionality of Free Cash is the same in whatever country you're in. There's also a referral program inside of Free Cash, so if you get somebody else to sign up for Free Cash, you get money. So make sure you sign up using my link. So the reason that we're going to be doing kind of a Spark Notes review of everything that happened during the War Devil arc is because the events of Chapter 231 are built off all of the previous events of this arc. And therefore, without understanding chapters 191 to 230, you really can't understand in its entirety why Pochita would choose to do what Pochita did in Chapter 231. But don't worry, for those of you who are weekly readers of Chainsaw Man and feel as though you got all the information up here already, we're doing a real brief overview to introduce some key concepts that play into the ending that Fujimoto is building. Now, the War Devil arc happens immediately immediately after the Aging Devil arc. The arc where the Public Safety Division works with the Japanese government to try to sacrifice 10,000 children across Japan to the Aging Devil in order for the Aging Devil to agree to be consumed by the Chainsaw Man, ensuring that aging as a concept would no longer exist. Now, the War Devil arc follows a somewhat similar plotline, as the War Devil arc itself is built around the idea of Denji or the Chainsaw Man either consuming the War Devil or the Death Devil. And as Denji is pulled in two opposite directions by two opposite factions, he has to find what group of people and what ideology to align himself with in order to ensure that his future is as bright as possible. Is it the Public Safety Division and Little D, or the Death Devil, or is it Asa and Yoru? Now, this arc actually begins to kick off when the real-life family is introduced. See, for the entirety of Part 2, we've known a character as Famine, and we believe that because that character is constantly incredibly hungry, that character therefore must be the Famine Devil, one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, that is to say the Control Devil, the War Devil, the Famine Devil, and the Death Devil. Four sisters. However, when a nervous girl with ringed eyes, like all of the other four horsemen of the apocalypse, shows up at a Tokyo high school and starts talking about how she wants to save humanity from its suffering, it seems as though this character who's being introduced is actually the Death Devil, finally descended down to Earth to kick off the prophecy of Nostradamus. That is to say, to ring in the apocalypse. And this hypothesis seemed relatively sound, on account of the fact that this devil seemingly had the ability to drain people of all of their life force simply by coming into contact with them. However, before this devil is able to save all of humanity from its suffering, the imposter Chainsaw Man hops onto the scene, confronting her and quickly cutting her down. Now, the imposter Chainsaw Man believes that this devil is the Death Devil, and therefore believes that he's saving the world by cutting her down. But after cutting her down multiple times, this devil reveals herself to be none other than Famine, the Famine Devil. And therefore, it's at this moment that it's revealed that the Famine we've been interfacing with this entire time is actually the Death Devil, or she likes to be called Little D. And as the imposter Chainsaw Man and the Famine Devil battle against each other, Little D, alongside the Falling Devil, who seemingly she's subjugated, descend down and easily dispatch of the two of them. At which point, the Falling Devil presents not only the imposter Chainsaw Man, but also the Famine Devil, Little D's sister, to Little D on a plate. And when Little D consumes them, it's revealed that Little D has the ability to subjugate all devils who she consumes, turning them into pawns that she can regurgitate and throw out of her mouth to summon, kind of like a Pokemon. And thus Little D sends the fake Chainsaw Man to kill Denji and Yoru, who are currently on a date biking through the decaying remains of human society. And alongside the fake Chainsaw Man is the Falling Devil. And while Yoru battles it out with the Falling Devil, Denji fights against the fake Chainsaw Man, who is eventually revealed to be the brother of a person that Denji allowed to die so that he could save Meowie, Power's cat. And after Denji cuts down the fake Chainsaw Man, it's revealed that the reason the fake Chainsaw Man had the abilities of a fake Chainsaw Man is because he and his brother had both made a contract with the Fire Devil, who was masquerading as the Justice Devil. And thus all instances we had seen of the Justice Devil over the course of Part 2 of Chainsaw Man were in actuality just the Fire Devil. While the Fire Devil explains to Denji who this boy was and what his contract with him meant, he tells Denji that at some point in the future he'll be presented with two options once again. Kind of like how he was presented with two options before, either save this boy's brother or Meowie, the cat. Now, later down the line, Denji would realize that the two possibilities that the Fire Devil was talking about was either backing the War Devil or the Death Devil. That is to say, either throwing the world into an infinite war cycle by consuming the Death Devil, or consuming the War Devil, which would lead to Little D's victory and her eradicating all of humanity. Now, after defeating fake Chainsaw Man, we pan over to Yoru, who's getting her butt kicked by the Falling Devil. However, just before Denji and Yoru are about to die in combat against the Falling Devil, the United States of America drops a nuclear weapon on the USSR. And it's this point that Yoru remembers her favorite child, the nuclear weapons devil, a devil that Chainsaw Man consumed in his titular battle against the Four Horsemen before he met Denji. However, Denji didn't puke up the nuclear weapons devil. That devil was already digested. It's been gone for a long time. Rather, after the concept of nuclear weapons was destroyed, America then once again figured out how to make nuclear weapons from scratch. And thus, now that nuclear weapons had been reintroduced, Yoru was able to become the most powerful devil on Earth. And as she was already tied to America by taking all of the fingers of NRA members to take over control of the Statue of Liberty, this only deepened her bonds with the country I call home. And thus immediately with this new power, Yoru is so much more powerful than the Falling Devil, she turns her into clothes and starts going on a rampage, trying to kill Denji. But at this point, Pochita, aka the Black Chainsaw Man, is in charge of the ship, and Asa and Denji are having a conversation in their mental space alleyway that we always see them in, where we get Asa's backstory, where it's revealed that Asa's mom killed her dad after he was attacked by a devil. Asa then tells Denji that she's going to create an opening for him to eat Yoru, and retakes control of her body and bangs off her head, at which point the Katana Devil swoops in and bisects Yoru, as the Katana Devil has now been taken under the control of not only Tokyo Special Division, but also Little D, who's working with the Tokyo Special Division, at least the majority of them, not Fumiko. However, rather than taking advantage of this opportunity to finish off Yoru once and for all, Pochita rather decapitates Famine, Little D, and the Katana Devil, which Denji takes as a sign from Pochita that he shouldn't have to choose one of two options. See, Denji doesn't have to choose whether to back the War Devil or the Death Devil. Denji and Pochita can simply make their own world that's perfect for them, and he invites Asa to this world. Yoru then grabs Little D's head and plants it back on her shoulders, because apparently Little D's ability, which is just to kill anybody and everything, activates upon Little D's death. Yes, that's the Death Devil's ability. She's able to just induce death in anybody. However, she can't control how strong it is, so if she induces death in somebody, she'll probably kill everybody. And if she dies, everybody on Earth is immediately killed. Yoru most likely included. But because Yoru is able to save Little D's life, and therefore in her mind convince herself that she owns Little D, she tries to turn her into a death sword, and is about to be successful until once again Chainsaw Man flies in and bites off Yoru's arms and Little D's torso and head. Now, historically, at least from what we've heard, if Chainsaw Man doesn't consume all of you, it doesn't erase you as a concept entirely, it just weakens you as a devil and your concept. We learned this because apparently in Pochita's first battle against the Four Horsemen, Pochita was able to consume part of the War Devil, which made humans less likely to go to war and the War Devil substantially weaker, which is why Yoru had to attach itself to Asa in the first place. However, seemingly the torso and the head is good enough, as when Pochita flies in and eats the top half of Little D, death as a concept is erased. Now for Yoru, death as a concept has kind of been erased for a while now, on account of the fact that in the lead up to this fight, she flew over to America and made a contract with California's governor that stated so long as Yoru does not attack California, anytime she dies, that death toll will be imposed upon one Californian citizen, which is kind of just a weaker version of the contract that Makima had with the American president, but still a contract that gives Yoru 32 million lives. But Yoru's connections to America don't stop there, as in her ongoing battle against Pochita, she proceeds to turn both Oregon and Michigan into weapons, and then turns the entirety of the population of Virginia into a nuclear punch. However, after being struck with the combined force of all of Virginia, Denji retakes control of his body. And for the first ever time, Yuji is in charge of Black Chainsaw Man. However, it's not Black Chainsaw Man. And what we're actually seeing is the first ever hybrid version combination of Red and Black Chainsaw Man. That is to say, it's the power of Pochita, but the brain of Denji. And thus Denji fights on with Yoru, covering himself in the heads of Yoru's favorite devils, like the Lion Devil and the Moray Eel Devil. And he tells her that if she doesn't let Asa retake control of her body, he's gonna continue to inflict pain or just straight up erase some of her favorite friends and devils. Now, all this is important because Yoru, as the War Devil, has realized that she needs to rely on others to inflict her trauma for her, as war is all-encompassing, and thus she's befriended an entire army of devils. And when Denji's done consuming all of Yoru's friends, he begins to consume pawns that were given to him by Little D, which causes him to erase concepts like legs and teeth, until eventually all the pawns are shot out of him. But rather interestingly, only the pawns are knocked out of him. You see, yes, Denji consumes devils like the Moray Eel Devil. However, just a couple of seconds after that, when Yoru knocks the pawns out of Denji's stomach that he had just consumed, only the pawns come out, not the Moray Eel Devil. And that might be relevant later on in this video. Now, the reason that Yoru doesn't want Denji eating all of these pawns is because Denji is messing up Yoru's perfect world. See, a world where nobody has teeth or legs isn't nearly as much fun as a world where people do. And without legs, this war is substantially harder to wage. But Denji, who's not trying to listen to Yoru, then casts himself down into hell to try and consume as many devils as possible, all in order to try and force Yoru's hand to give Asa back. However, Yoru follows him down into hell, but before their fight can really progress at all, they're interrupted either by the Pestilence Devil or the Mantis Shrimp Devil, and I'm not entirely sure of which. And the two of them have to work together to kill this incredibly strong foe, who eventually Denji eats the head of. However, immediately after the two of them kill their collective enemy, Yoru once again picks up the offensive on Denji, blowing him into smithereens until eventually Denji is nothing more than a stump. But Denji's able to use his chainsaw whips to pull himself away from Yoru, and upon realizing that he needs blood in order to regenerate his body, he regurgitates a dove to eat. And therefore, just as Yoru was about to drive a chainsaw motorcycle into Denji's chest, most likely killing him, upon seeing the dove, she swerves, and she's launched from her motorcycle at high speeds, flying into a building, cracking her skull open. And it's revealed that apparently the reason that Yoru decided to swerve and not kill the bird, and therefore not kill Denji, is because Yoru knows Asa hates when birds die, which all ties back to Asa's backstory of accidentally killing the class chicken, which she constantly has nightmares about. However, because it was Yoru who injured herself, no citizens of California died to heal her wounds, and thus she just lays on the concrete, bleeding out. And thus Yoru and Asa begin to have a conversation, where Yoru tells Asa that in order to create stronger weapons, she has to empathize with her host. However, try as she might have, she was never able to empathize with Asa's guilt. Now, as this conversation is going on, Denji crawls over to Yoru's body and cuts his own arm, flinging his blood into her mouth, which leads to Yoru recovering and immediately pointing her gun gauntlet at Denji's face, asking him if he's dumber than a chicken and if he wants to die. But Denji simply says that he wanted to bring her back to life because she said if he eats some dangerous devils that she'll have sex with him. And considering the fact that he had consumed the death devil, he figured he'd eaten dangerous enough devils for Yoru to consider having sex with him. And this makes her laugh, and while she admits that she hates the Chainsaw Man, she likes Denji. And thus she says yes, she'll have sex with him. And Asa gives her consent too. And she heals Denji with some nearby blood. However, before these two are able to get it on, we see that the entire world through the medium of Fumiko's communicating with each other is actively being overtaken by bats and cockroaches and any kind of swarming animal that are no longer being called on account of the fact that death as a concept has been erased. And therefore, even though Little D didn't kill all of humanity, things like cockroaches, bats, and ants having a 100% birth survival rate has led to them all but instantaneously overtaking the world, which has also led to all of their respective devils getting ridiculously powerful. And all of those respective devils have come to fight Denji and Yoru, who are both low on blood. And thus chapter 231 opens with Denji and Pochita realizing that they had been consumed, most likely by the devils that they were supposed to be fighting in chapter 230. And thus chapter 231 opens up with a focus on a bird flying through the sky, most likely either a reference to the first host that Yoru ever took, which was a bird that felt guilty for eating worms, or a reference to the dove that caused for Yoru to swerve, launching herself into a building. All that is to say that the bird is most definitely a reference to either Asa or Yoru. And after this, much like how in chapter 1, after Pochita became Yuji's heart, we see Pochita sitting on Yuji's chest. Now, we know after Pochita becoming Denji's heart, the only time the two of them are able to see each other is when they're in Denji's mind. And thus when Denji wakes up and sees Pochita, he says, "Pochita, how?" To which Pochita rather gleefully responds to by saying, "Denji, it looks like we got eaten by a devil." To which Denji responds to by saying, "Wait, that's bad. What's that gonna do to us?" And it's this moment that things get serious, as Pochita tells Denji, "Our dream life together is over, but maybe that's a good thing." But Denji doesn't agree. He says, "No, there's no way that's a good thing. I was getting close to having sex. I was about to have kisses, unlimited kisses." But Pochita tells him, "It's a good thing you didn't get to do that, Denji." Which Denji responds to by saying, "Are you serious?" Pochita carries on by saying, "When you found a precious family, that being Naota and all of their dogs, when you got to go to the high school you wanted to attend, which is how part 2 started, and when you connected with Asa, which obviously he was doing over the course of part 2, some of you was still unhappy, wasn't it?" And it's this moment that the abject fear on Denji's face begins to contort into sad understanding. Pochita continues on by saying, unfortunately, you must have noticed as well. You were far happier starving and fighting devils and eating spoiled bread in that rundown shack. Turns out you had the crappiest but best kind of brain, the kind of brain that can only find heaven when you're in the midst of hell. Now it's at this moment that Pochita takes his Black Chainsaw Man form, and he gives Denji a hug. He then, after embracing his host for the last couple of years, steps back and takes one of his two right arms and plunges it into his own chest, tearing out his very own Pochita heart, telling Denji, Denji, I'm gonna eat myself now. I don't know what will happen afterward. A world in which Chainsaw Man, I never existed, will come to be. Denji's getting up at this point and he's screaming at Pochita, no, you can't do that. I don't want to lose you. But Pochita, with his own heart in his hands, says, in a world without me, maybe you can keep dreaming. Since meeting you, I've seen all the dreams I've ever wanted to. And then we see the Black Chainsaw Man put Pochita in his mouth. And from his mouth, Pochita, as a heart with a deuce up, says, keep on dreaming, Denji. While Denji screams for his best friend to reconsider. But as the Black Chainsaw Man bites down, the sky goes black. We see Denji reaching out and Pochita waving goodbye. And then in the next panel, he's gone. So is the ground. Which leads us to the final double spread of the chapter, where seemingly we've returned to the shack that Denji and Pochita lived in when they were two separate entities. And it looks exactly the same. The city it stares over seemingly isn't overrun by bugs. The same trees stand there. And more importantly, just like the first time it was ever introduced to us, it's raining there. So what happens in a world where Pochita never existed? Are all of the devils it ever consumed brought back into existence? Is Denji's entire life reset back to the time before he met Pochita, as he stood at the grave of his father and came face to face with an inter-devil who he let bite him? Or did everything still happen, but now the world simply forgot why? I don't know. But if I had to guess, I'd say it has something to do with the fact that when Denji was kicked by Yoru and puked up all the pawns, he didn't puke up the devils he had strapped to his chest. And I don't know why that would be important. I just feel as though it should be. Because why wouldn't they be? Maybe because as a devil, when you're consumed in a world post-death devil, you're sent somewhere else, or you're immediately metabolized into the system of whoever you're consumed by. Like, there has to be a hint in there as to what exactly is happening with Denji right now. Because Denji and Pochita were consumed by the devils that attacked them. And just because Pochita decided in this meta space to consume himself, doesn't necessarily mean that they would be unconsumed by those devils. Those devils who, mind you, were showcased in chapter 230, who seemed to have a relatively primal design. That being the crescent moon-shaped one, the Cyclops one, and I don't even really know how to describe the third one. But for the moment, I don't know what's going on, but it looks like Pochita's gone, which means Chainsaw Man is gone, which means Chainsaw Man, the story, is probably coming to an end here pretty soon. And that makes double sense when you consider the fact that the end game for Denji is to probably live with Asa/Yoru, and both Asa and Yoru like Denji, but Yoru hates Chainsaw Man. But if Chainsaw Man is gone, well then Yoru just likes Denji. But I could also in chapter 231 see Fujimoto building towards the idea that Denji's been so focused on singular events like hugging a girl, feeling a girl's boobs, having sex, that he didn't realize that the things that made him well and truly happy were the times he got to spend with Pochita. I could also see Fujimoto using Denji as a way to display the fact that life is more enjoyable when it's simpler. See, Denji's goals have evolved over the course of Chainsaw Man. When he was first at his father's grave in chapter 1, he says before he dies he wants to hug a girl. But then he wanted to feel up a girl, and then kiss a girl, and then have sex with a girl. But every single time Denji accomplished what he was reaching for, he didn't feel the satisfaction he was looking for. He felt shame and self-hatred as the goalposts moved further and further away. And therefore, the ending that Fujimoto could be aiming for is a commentary on the idea that the more that we strive for, the less we actually achieve. And it's not until we recognize how far we've come and what we already have that we achieve true happiness. And thus, if I had to, without having a week to sit on it and doing all the research under the sun, give you an answer to what I believe is going to be the end of Chainsaw Man, I believe in some context Asa and Yoru are going to replace Pochita, as Asa and Denji live a shit life in a shattered society. And as wild as it sounds, I don't in my heart of hearts believe that Denji is going to get laid. Not on some kind of commentary about how like abstinence is sick or something like that, but rather to display that Yuji is no longer absent-mindedly chasing after the next biggest thing. But if I was being entirely honest with you, you could have given me a million guesses after the conclusion of chapter 230, and none of them would have included that in chapter 231, Pochita was going to eat himself. So take my prediction with a grain of salt. But much more than usual, I am very curious to hear from you guys. What do you think about chapter 231? Do you think Chainsaw Man is coming to its end, or you think this is one big fake out? Let me know in the comments below. While you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Now we have to wait 2 more weeks for another chapter. And I just, this is not the time to be skipping weeks, Fujimoto.